mzee yangu, nimeshikwa na mzee yangu na ndugu zangu, na ile watu wakati hiyo kuna watu yangu wengine wanatoka kwa badia anakaa kwa nyumba yangu. Watu 3 ndio natoka kwa nyumba yangu.
Wewe uliwaona?
Si ndio, kwa maisha yangu. Kwa maisha yangu. Mimi na
leaders, people who akiongea the whole tribe.
Baada ya kushuhudia vilio vya waume katika uwanja mdogo wa Wagala, mahala ambapo mauaji ya kikatili yali
Northeastern Kenya is predominantly inhabited by ethnic Somalis who share cultural and familial ties across the border. During the 1963 and 1967 Shifta insurgency, many Somalis in Kenya campaigned to secede and join Somalia. The Kenyan state deployed heavy security measures to suppress this rebellion. In the ensuing decades, Somalis in Kenya often felt they were treated as second-class citizens, subject to special identity screening and suspected of disloyalty. Within Wajir district in modern Wajir County, the Somali population is divided into sub-clans, e.g. Degodia, Ajuran, and Ogaden. Interclan disputes and cattle raiding occasionally flared, and the government portrayed these as banditry or rebel activities. By the early 1980s, the region was impoverished and underdeveloped with a heavy security presence. Many locals recall that security officers viewed the entire Degodia clans with suspicion. As one researcher notes, the Kenyan army had routinely deployed units to northeastern province to combat banditry and rid the civilian population of illegal firearms, beginning with the suppression of Shifta war. Wagala, a dusty airstrip some 15 kilometers west of Wajir town, lay deep in the Degodia clan territory. According to local critics, Kenya security forces believed with scant evidence that all Degodia men were armed and rebellious. In this charged climate, even daily life was militarized. Former police officer Haji Mohammed Abdullahi later recalled that soldiers would stop anyone in the streets and demand, "Which clan are you from?" If the man answered Degodia, he was immediately detained. The pretext of 1984 operations was reportedly a minor skirmish between the Degodia and the neighboring clan, but many analysts argued this was merely a pretext for a broader crackdown. In sum, in the years before 1984, Kenya's Somali borderland suffered chronic underdevelopment, tight security control, and state distrust of its Somali citizens, factors that set the stage for tragedy.
Is the Wagala airstrip. In 1984, a military operation to disarm one of the Somali clans saw the seizure of men, women, and children, and they were brought here to the Wagala airstrip and murdered.
In early February 1984, a large-scale security operation suddenly engulfed Wajir and surrounding areas. In the night of February 9th, government troops, army, paramilitary, and police units fanned out across Wajir town and rural parts of the district. They forcibly rounded up thousands of local men, mostly from the Degodia clan, but also other Somali residents, house to house. According to survivors, soldiers burst into homes, raping women, destroying property, and seizing the men. Prisoners were loaded into trucks and taken to Wagala airstrip, then a gravel landing strip. One survivor remembered being taken there on a military truck after simply leaving a school to register for class. Over the next several days, reports suggest up to 5 days, detainees were held in brutal conditions. A retired officer who later testified secretly to a truth commission gave a chilling account. The men were stripped naked and allowed to bake in the sun, 40 degrees Celsius heat, for hours on end. They were not allowed food or water. From the time they were rounded up, the beatings with rifle butts were continuous. Those who questioned the humiliation were summarily shot in full view of their fellow prisoners. When prisoners were forced to produce weapons or confess to arms, some feigned ignorance, a response that the soldiers found unacceptable. Those who dared to stand or protest were immediately killed to set an example. One account describes how dissenters were bound, loaded into military helicopter hovering overhead, and then thrown out mid-air. Their hands were bound behind their backs and loaded into a helicopter. At some points, the bound men would be pushed out of the open door. They felt their death hundreds of feet below. Meanwhile, many prisoners simply collapsed and died from the heat, thirst, or beatings. By the second or third day, survivors report that dead bodies littered the airstrip. Some prisoners, realizing they were not going to be released, made desperate bids for freedom. On about the fourth day, several prisoners broke through the perimeter and ran into the bush. Initially, the guards were stunned. Then they opened fire. A hail of fire was sprayed into the directions of the fleeing men. Many fell, recalled one officer. In the chaos, a few men escaped to tell the tale, but most remained captive until the operation wound down around February 13th or 14th. The human toll of the 5-day atrocity is still disputed. Eyewitnesses claim that thousands of people were delivered to the airstrip without food or water, baking in the hot sun. Some estimate as many as 5,000 men perished. The Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission later reported close to 1,000 killed, noting the exact figure could not be determined. Bodies were buried in shallow graves at or near the airstrip. One later investigation counted roughly 300 confirmed victims, but also found evidence that many more bodies were haphazardly dumped and remained uncounted. In the immediate aftermath, Wajir was traumatized. Family mourned hundreds of missing husbands, brothers, and fathers, many of whom were government employees. Even the town's former senator Nur Haji was amongst the dead. People wept openly. A night watchman, as one survivor, Nur Dakhani Abdi, later recalled, "They kept beating us continuously. I asked the officer to shoot me in the head so that I die. And he said, 'You are not worthy of my bullets.'" Abdi said, recalling how he collapsed repeatedly under the relentless beatings. The scope of the carnage in 1984, the largest mass killing of Kenyan civilians in the post-independence era, was painstakingly pieced together only decades later from sparse evidence and survivors' testimonies.
Sali, tunaamka kusali mpaka kuwakisha moto. Kuna gari wakati naingia askari ndio anafanya sisi, wakati naingia askari tunasikia up hivi. Hata tumeona askari sura yake sisi tuna.
The primary accounts of Wagala have come from survivors and witnesses. Many have vividly recounted the ordeal. Abdirizak Nur Mohammed, then a young student, recalled being picked up on the streets of Wajir and forced onto a truck to Wagala. Haji Muhammad Abdullahi, a former police officer who happened to be in Wajir at the time, said simply, "When the army saw you walking down the streets, if you say, 'I'm Degodia,' they will put you in the lorry and drive off." Other survivors have since published harrowing details. One man who escaped to Wagala naked relates, "I had never stepped into Wajir town before 9th Feb 1984. They were both picked up. He found himself at Wagala naked, hungry and thirsty, watching as life ebbed out of his father." Another survivor woke in the depressingly vivid scene. He woke up in a pile of bodies. Next to him was his 16-year-old cousin's corpse, an innocent boy shot in the back of the head. A third escaped during the chaos. One survivor escaped in the stampede naked, found a young girl herding goats and helped him cover his shame with her scarf. These personal testimonies, recorded by journalists and Truth Commission, underscores the cruelty. When asked in interviews why they did not simply flee, survivors explained that security forces surrounded the town and terrorized everyone in public. A former teacher said, "They kept collecting people during the day and during the night. At night we were told to remove our clothes, and during the day we were told to lie down on the heated ground." In official forums, survivors testified similarly. At a 2011 TJRC hearing, accounts emerged of women being raped in front of family, of people burned alive, and of airstrip being converted into killing field. Collectively, survivors emphasized that the goal seemed to be extermination of civilian population, not lawful policy. One analysis concluded, Wagala was a classic extermination of people, a deliberate policy aimed at clearing Kenya's Somali population out of their land, originating in independence-era directives. Political climate under President Moi 1978 to 2002, the Wagalla Massacre occurred under President Daniel Arap Moi, whose 24 years rule was marked by authoritarianism and ethnic patronage. In the early 1980s, Moi government faced internal challenges. An attempt coup in 1982 was followed by a harsh crackdown in dissent. Moi relied heavily on security forces, military, police, and his feared special branch intelligence units to maintain order. Critics note that under Moi, minority regions like the Northeast received little political capital. Somali Kenyans, long mistreated due to shifter insurgents and ethnic bias, had virtually no allies in the Kenyatta-Moi regime, both led by Kenya's Kikuyu and allied elites. The Shura, administrative structure imposed by successive governments, often sidelined Somali voices. Officially, Wagala was framed as a legitimate anti-bandit operation. Interior Minister communiques and newspapers of the time described the Degodia militiamen resisting disarmament, but survivors and analysts argue that response was grossly disproportionate and ethnicized. Parliamentary records from 1984 reveal how fraught the topic was. Wajir Member of Parliament Ahmed Khalif directly challenged the regime, accusing it of massacring hundreds in Wajir and accusing top officials of collusion with Somalia. Khalif even tabled lists of victims, including civil servants and even the former Wajir Senator Nur Haji, as evidence. Fellow MPs were furious and effectively silenced the discussion, illustrating how politically sensitive Wagala was. Meanwhile, high-level officials implicated in Wagala rose and or remained in power. Benson Karia, Provincial Commissioner of Northeastern Province in 1984, was later promoted to national security roles. He consistently denied wrongdoing and publicly stated he had no apologies for Wagala when later questioned. Article notes he was widely blamed as a main orchestrator. In late 1970s, 1980s, Kenyan state operated in an environment of ethnic favoritism and security-driven governance. Wagala took place in a period where no independent media or judiciary could easily challenge the president's policy, especially in remote regions. This climate of impunity and marginalization helped enable the massacre to occur and remain hidden for decades.
The assurance that we are giving the residents of Wagala, the victims, and other Kenyans who suffered historical injustices is that the Commission is in for the long haul, and that we shall continue to join with you to pursue justice.
Despite survivors' accounts, no thorough investigation occurred for many years. Immediately after Wagala, the regime downplayed the violence. For 16 years, the official narrative was that only 57 people died in the legitimate security operation against bandits. It was not until after Moi left office that Wagala gained official scrutiny. In 2008 to 2013, Kenya established the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission to examine historical injustices. During TJRC public hearing 2011-2012, dozens of survivors, former officers and officials gave testimony on Wagala. International observers noted, however, that the TJRC was hamstrung by controversy. Its chairman, Ambassador Bethel Kiplagat, had been implicated in the Wagala planning. He chaired security meetings in 1984 and stepped aside briefly. Funding was cut as donors worried about buyers. The TJRC final report 2013 devoted entire chapters of Wagala. It corroborated mass killings, arbitrary detention, torture, rape, and looting during the operation, drawing on survivors' statements and the fragmentary archival evidence. The commission found that security forces surrounded Wajir town, abducted men at random, and kept them at Wagala without food, water, or medical attention, resulting in systematic large-scale execution. It concluded that Wagala was one of Kenya's worst human rights violations, recommending that those involved in the planning and implementation be investigated and prosecuted, and that the state issue formal apologies and reparations. Notably, the TJRC singled out some high-level figures, including Kiplagat as persons of interest, and unprecedented move to Truth Commission and implicated its own chairman. Human rights organizations and journalists have also documented Wagala. Human Rights Watch and others have chronicled the marginalization of Kenya Somali. For example, in 1990, HRW report on identity screening. In news media, Wagala resurfaced in the 2000s. Al Jazeera In 2014, features included fresh survivors' interviews. Kenya's newspaper, e.g. Daily Nation, ran an investigative piece and editorial calling for accountability. Through these investigations, a fuller picture emerged. Wagala was a centrally planned security operation, not a localized riot, and its horror was comparable to notorious mass atrocities elsewhere.
waa argagaxni mar meel nagala jiraan aqaan weyn markaan meel nagala jira hadan aqaan weyn markaan anaga aanba wareere oo inta daan fiiri waa askar inta daan fiiri waa gaari inta daan fiiri markaan aan gogobsanayn dukaanka dhexdiisa aan yeel marka anaga wax bariyo ah oo leeyo imaaday oo dadka si fiican wajigiis u fiirina ma baahan anaga.
Officially, the Kenyan government for years denied any wrongdoing at Wagala. In 1994, it blamed the deaths on the Degodia bandits resisting arrest. Only after pressure from refugees, Somali, Kenya who fled to Somalia, and international attention did the government grudgingly adjusted its narrative. In October 2000, Moi's government publicly admitted the security forces had killed civilians at Wagala and revised the official death toll to 380. Yet this admission came without any prosecutions or compensation. After the TJRC reports came out in 2013, the government promised, at least rhetorically, to implement its recommendations. In March 2015, President Uhuru Kenyatta issued a general national apology for past wrongs, but did not single out Wagala. He simultaneously announced a restorative justice fund of Kenya shillings 10 billion, about $100 million for historical events. In practice, implementation stalled. Only 3.6 billion was allocated to victims in 2016-2017, and guidelines for claiming from the fund were not issued until 2018 with little public awareness. Victim advocates complained that the report was ignored by government, as Parliament only printed selected portions of the TJRC report, omitting the chapters of Wagala. To date, no Wagala survivor has been compensated or brought to an official tribunal, and none of the security officers involved have been prosecuted. Many of the individuals cited in the TJRC report continue to hold public or private powers. Benson Carr, now deceased, never faced justice and was even celebrated by some of his former colleagues. In 2020, when Carr died, a nation newspaper retrospective lamented that the last mastermind of the Wagalla Massacre would take secrets to the grave. Throughout, the struggle for justice has been largely driven by victims and civil society, with limited government cooperation. Wajir County officials and groups like the Truth to Be Told Network have pressured Nairobi to act. In 2012, then Prime Minister Raila Odinga ordered a fresh probe into Wagala and even proposed building a memorial museum for the victims. However, these proposals have not been realized. As one commentator summarized, "We are in a country where justice and recognition of past events is a problem. I have come to the realization that the government will do nothing about the Wagalla Massacre."
By the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission that was handed to the president 8 months ago, there are concerns that
Wagala remains a scar in Kenya national memory. Among Somalis in Kenya, it is commemorated annually by survivors and clansmen. Each February, memorial events and prayers are held. For example, a 40th anniversary vigil was held on February 14, 2024 in Wajir, where survivors demanded accountability and healing. At these gatherings, speakers stressed the importance of telling the Wagala story as part of Kenya's history. As one veteran activist put it, "In our journey from victim to survivor, we reclaim our narrative and demand justice as a fundamental right, not a distant hope." Another survivor, Mama Dahabo Osman, asserted, "Surviving doesn't mean forgetting. It means fighting for a justice that heals wounds and restores dignity." Official commemorations have been modest. In 2014, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights unveiled a small Wagala Memorial Monument in Wajir town, a simple stone marker at the site of a mass grave. The KNCHR urged that Wagala airstrip itself be declared a national monument, but this has not happened. Beyond Wajir, most Kenyans have little knowledge of Wagala. It receives scant coverage in history textbooks or media outside anniversaries. When asked, some Kenyans dismiss it as Somali issue, a perception Wagala survivors bitterly reject. Internationally, Wagala is little known, mentioned only in special human rights reports and academia.